Have you ever wondered how to grow these gorgeous ranunculus flowers from these weird looking corms? Ranunculus truly are one of the most beautiful cut flowers. I'm Cherry, I live in a cottage in the English countryside and I own an English country cafe in the gorgeous market town of Petworth. Welcome to the home of modern English country living. Every Sunday evening a weekly lifestyle vlog goes live and every Thursday I publish a project or a how-to. Welcome to today's how-to. How to grow ranunculus. The most beautiful cut flower, and they are surprisingly easy. In this video, I'll take you from planting to an explosion of amazing flowers that will bloom in a riot of colour and that you'll be able to cut and bring indoors. I'll cover everything if you're a beginner, but I'll also show you how to start them in pots and transplant them outside. We'll troubleshoot any problems together and I'll give you all the hints and tips I know so that you can maximise your flowers right through the season. But stick around because you'll also get my secret to getting double the number of flowers per plant. Let's start at the beginning with preparing our ranunculus corms. These are ranunculus corms. I've got 10 of them here and they look like little spiky octopus or squid. So these fellas are quite dry. Before they get anywhere near soil, we have to soak them. So I've got a dish here full of water from the tap. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to soak our ranunculus corms. We're going to leave them in there from anywhere between 3 hours and 12 hours. We need to waken them up a bit, and hydrating them like this not only wakes them up, but it really does help to accelerate growth. I'm going to go off and do something else now, while these little fellas wake up a bit. Welcome to my makeshift potting bench. We're starting our ranunculus corms in pots. We're then going to plant them outside into a flower bed, but right now, this is March, we're going to start them in pots. I find it a lot easier to do it this way as I have more control over how they start to grow. I can control the temperature more, so I can make sure that the pots are kept in a very cool but frost-free position, and I can just check on them and see their progress more easily. I quite like doing it this way. One of the most important things when growing ranunculus corms is that you do not allow them to get too wet. If they get too wet and soggy, then they can begin to rot. So we're starting off with a nice sized pot with some very nutrient-rich potting compost. You have to have free draining soil, again, because we don't want our ranunculus corms to get too wet, too soggy and rot. The key to starting off our ranunculus in pots is to use nutrient-rich but very free-draining soil. You don't want your ranunculus corms to get too wet, soggy and rot. We don't want them to rot in the pot. Okay, so my corms have been soaking for about 4 hours now, and you can tell they're sort of swollen. They're not dry or brittle anymore, and they're soaking up all of the water, and they're ready to go into a pot. So because we're going to start these ranunculus off in pots, but then transplant them to a flower bed, I'm going to put about 3 in a pot this size because they're not going to be in there forever. So I just want to start them in the pot and then transplant them. They are incredibly easy to plant. You've got your little corm here, with their little legs and their tentacles facing downwards. They only need to go in about 5 centimetres, 2 inches down. Do one more, I've got one here. Let's make a little 2 inches and then there we go. I'll show you one more time. I've got a little pot here, I'll just put one in. Just make a little hole, just 2 inches. You've got your corm here, legs down. Pop it in, cover it over, just about 2 inches, 5 centimetres or thereabouts, and then we will water them in. Water the corms in. Not too much because we don't want to make them too soggy, and this is why it's very important that your soil is free draining. Okay, so we've planted 3 corms in this pot here and I've watered them in. I've got drainage at the bottom and it's a very free-flowing soil. As I keep saying, we don't want the corms to get too soggy and to rot. I've still got some more here, so I'm going to put them into the other pots. What we need to do now is to make sure that they don't get too cold. But right now, whilst they're getting going, I don't want them to be too exposed. So I'm going to put these just down here. So they're sheltered, but they're outside and they will stay cool, but they won't freeze if there's a frost, which there may well be. It's only March. I've known it to snow in April before. You could put your pots in an unheated greenhouse. They would work very well there as well, but protect them from any frost. So our ranunculus are now in their pots, but what do we do now? Well, stay tuned because I'm going to give you my top tips for growing your ranunculus. So the roots of the ranunculus corms will form after about 2 to 3 weeks of being in the pots. Now, you'd think that you could transplant them then, but don't do that. Wait until all chance of frost has well and truly passed. If you were to transplant the ranunculus too early, they could go into the ground and the corms can rot in freezing or ground that's much, much too wet. So wait until it's drier, wait until it's warmer, and wait until all chance of frost has passed. When you plant them out, what spot in your garden should you plant them into? Well, ranunculus like sun, but they don't like to get their roots too warm. So it's this weird combination of the flowers wanting the sun, but their little bottoms not wanting it so much. If you are keeping your ranunculus in pots, make sure that those pots get some shade and some shelter or a break from the sun during the day. Don't let those pots get too warm. If you are planting them from pots into the ground, you want a sheltered sunny spot. So like I said, you want them to have a good few hours of sun a day, but you don't want their roots or the corms to get too hot. So you don't want the soil to bake. You want the soil to have good drainage. Again, we don't want any rotting happening. How do you space your ranunculus once you put them into the ground? I like to plant mine between 6 and 7 inches apart. If your ranunculus do extremely well, which I know they will, you want to give them enough room to grow. You want to give them enough room to breathe. You don't want them to be too tightly packed in. You want to allow for airflow and you want to allow for those wonderful flowers. They're quite heavy on the foliage as well. So once yours start to grow, they sort of sprout from the bottom and then the flowers come out on a very, very long stem, which of course makes them perfect as a cut flower. This is why we love them. But they do need a little bit of room, so don't crowd them. Let's quickly troubleshoot some problems that you may have when growing ranunculus. If you find the leaves are turning yellow, this means that you've overwatered them or they don't have enough drainage. Again, I keep going back to this. They need to be watered, but they need good drainage. Don't let them get too wet and don't overwater them. They could get fungal conditions if they're too tightly packed in and all of the bacteria grows around them. Again, that's why we like to space them out. And although we like to water them, we don't like them to get too wet. I feel like I'm repeating myself. Who loves a ranunculus? Well, slugs and snails, but mainly in damp weather. So if you're having a very wet spring, early summer, you may have to go out and pick them off individually by hand. I like to do that. I don't like to use any sort of slug or snail killer or anything like that. I just sort of pick them off. But again, you can avoid that to a certain extent if you've got them in quite a dry but well-watered spot. So they like the dampness. And of course, one other thing to avoid with ranunculus is heat stress. But if you do have them in a very, very hot space, then think about getting a heat shield or something that will protect them from hours and hours of lots and lots of direct heat. You'll find that if they get too hot, they'll stop blooming. They get exhausted. But don't worry about them stopping blooming as you go into the summer. They're much more of a sort of spring, early summer flowering plant. So I told you that I'd tell you how to get double the amount of flowers from your ranunculus. It's very simple. Just remember to deadhead them. Look, cut them as much as you like and put them in a beautiful vase. You don't have to leave them outside. The more you cut, the more they'll come. If you do leave them outside, as soon as the flower fades, get rid of it. You're telling the plant, look, this one is spent, let's make a new one. Definitely feed your ranunculus with your chosen flower food. So what do we do with our ranunculus as the growing season finishes, which is when it starts to get really warm, hot in the summer? Well, you'll notice that the foliage starts to turn yellow, sort of dries out a little bit and dies back. And of course, they'll stop flowering. Lots of people treat ranunculus as annuals. You can dig up the corms from the ground, dry them off and store them, and they may come back the next year. I'm not a good enough gardener to have that success. So I tend to grow ranunculus every year. They're so easy. You soak them, you pop them in a couple of inches down, and then you pop them in the garden. That to me is perfect, and I don't mind doing that. In fact, I find growing ranunculus corms easier than growing sweet peas. I find ranunculus easier to care for than sweet peas, and no one seems to be put off or frightened of growing sweet peas. Well, if you've ever wanted to grow ranunculus, then this is your chance to do it. We have covered all the basics when it comes to growing ranunculus in this vlog, and I hope you've enjoyed it. We've covered our little dried up, shriveled corms. We've soaked them until they're plump. We've made sure that they're sheltered and that they won't get frostbitten. We've watered them in, and we know how long it will be before we start to see some growth. We know where to plant them. We know what to do when they start flowering, and we know what to do when it either gets too hot or they stop flowering and their growing cycle is over. I hope you've enjoyed this Ranunculus 101. If you have, then do think about subscribing, because I present a project or a how-to every week on a Thursday. Give me a like or hit subscribe for more modern English country living and life from my cottage here in the West Sussex countryside. If you've grown ranunculus or you have any other questions, then do leave them in the comments below. We have a very, very active community who are so helpful, and I will of course answer any questions that come in as soon as I can. I'm back on Sunday with another weekly vlog, and next Thursday with another how-to. Have a great week, and I can't wait to see your ranunculus flower.